Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I hope you're doing well. It's been a while now since I updated my top 10 favourite fantasy series of all time, so today is the day for me to revisit it. So I'm not going to bore you with too much preamble to this one. We'll get to the books in just a moment, but a couple of things first of all. This is my top 10 favourite fantasy series, so it's all based on my opinion. It's not necessarily best. There is a difference between best and favourite, but this is all based on my gut feeling, how much these books mean to me and how long I've enjoyed them, and any other factors that just make them a favourite to me. To be considered for this list, it must be a completed series. The author must have finished writing the books for it, and I must have read them all, because how can I judge the overall series if I haven't read all the books, or if the author hasn't put out the finale, which can make or break a series. There are no honourable mentions here. We're going to dive straight into the top 10, and we're going to start off with Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. So again, I'm going to specify, like with the previous update to this list, it's Era 1 of Mistborn, because I've not read Era 2. I don't want to read Era 2. It's not my type of fantasy. I did give it a try and put it down very quickly, but I love Mistborn for its accessibility, for what it's brought to fantasy, and for the many readers it's brought to fantasy as well. I love the magic system in here. It's just so inventive. I love reading all of the different ways that you can use the magical powers, mostly the Allomancy. There are a few other bits and pieces in here as well, but we're talking about the different things that you can do with metals in here. It's just so inventive, and I loved learning about them all and reading about them all. The characters in here are great. The overall storyline, the world building, I really enjoyed. But the one thing really is the magic that stands out for me. But I love how accessible it is, as I say, and how it's definitely a really good entry to fantasy. So if you're looking to get into fantasy, you haven't really read much so far, this is a great starting point. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson is my 10th favourite completed series. Moving on to another big giant of the fantasy world. In 9th, I've got The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and this series was actually completed by Brandon Sanderson, who co-wrote the last 3 books after Robert Jordan sadly passed away. This is a behemoth of a series. There are 14 books plus a prequel novel, a full novel, not a novella, so 15 books, and most of them are about this size as well. They are proper chunkers, so if you're looking for a really long fantasy journey, there are a few longer than this that really hold up and really keep you engaged throughout the series. Plenty of people will talk about that slump in the middle, but when you're talking about the series as a whole, that really gets forgotten about for me, because there are so many great points about this. You've got a couple of different types of magic again, or a couple of different strains, I guess, of the same magic perhaps, and I love the characters inventing and discovering new things, new aspects to the magic, new artifacts as the series went on. With a 14-book main series, of course the world building is going to be really extensive. You get to see so much of it as they explore, as they move around the continent, and there are so many different cultures that you can see in here. The characters for me were great as well. There's a real handful that have really stuck with me and passed the test of time, and overall this is one of those series that I just really look back with fondness. But the ending of it really gave us some great moments, with a final battle to beat all final battles. It was an absolute giant of a chapter, and it needed to be, and I love that they not only went for it, but they pulled it off. It's a real experience overall, and The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan is my 9th favourite series. In at number 8, it's kind of a dual series. This one is The Serpent War by Raymond D. Feist, combined with the Rift War, the series that came before it. In the overall Rift War cycle, there are 7, 8, 9 different series, mostly trilogies, in the Rift War cycle, but the Serpent War is the second, Rift War was first, and I really love these books. They are, there's definitely a nostalgia factor with these for me, because they are some of the books that I read earlier on in my journey through fantasy. One of the first fantasy books that I read was Magician, book 1 of the Rift War saga. And again, it's one of those series where there are a whole bunch of characters who have just stuck with me and I think about every now and then. When I think about great characters who really stand out and kind of mean a lot to me because I guess, read so many books with them, but because they are such exciting characters. There's a load of them in here. The world building, again, like the Wheel of Time, you've got so many different books, so you've got a whole vast world that the characters can and do explore, and I love that. This one is more of a medieval kind of setting of fantasy. There's not quite so much magic that really stands out, and yet saying that, there is a lot of magic that's used in here. The first book is called Magician, but it's not a series that's just about the magic. The thing that really stands out is the characters and their interactions and the stories that they take you on. I love the Rift War cycle overall, but the first two series of it, the Rift War and the Serpent War, are the two that make it as a combined entry, a number 8 in my list. And then moving on to one of the newer entries now. In 7th, I've got Threadlight by Zach Argyle. This is one which has had many comparisons to Mistborn, but you can see here it's appearing higher up in the list because I like it more than I liked Mistborn. You've got a similar type of magic where you've got push and pull. There's no allomancy involved here. It's not to do with metal or anything along those lines. Really, that is where the similarity ends, but people will make those links. For me here, I loved the push and pull magic that you've got with the sapphires and the emeralds. It's all defined by eye colour here. It really just creates an interesting type of world for me, and the different characters, seeing how they can navigate this world and the situations they find themselves in. The main thing for me here though is the characters. I absolutely loved the story that our characters went on and the way they interacted, the way that you got the different groups of them coming together. But there's a proper family aspect to this as well, not just the found family that you have. There is a full family in here as well, with our main character being a new father right at the start of the book. His wife is pregnant, and I like seeing how that changes a man and how it changes the decisions that he makes and the reasons that he does things. Overall, it's a fantastic series, some great characters, some absolute standout moments for me across the 3 books that make this trilogy, and so Threadlight by Zach Argyle is number 7 in my list. In at number 6 then, we've got another new entry. It's The Last War by Mike Shackle. I really loved the aspect of rebellion that you got in here. It's probably the one series that really made me realise how much I like rebellion as a theme, as a trope in my fantasy, because it was just done so well in this series. In here, you start off with We Are the Dead, and you've got an invading country who really shouldn't be able to invade. They've never really been up to much. It's been very easy to repel any attacks that they make until one day something changes. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil what that something is, but it changes the entire world for very obvious reasons. But I love the rebellion aspect and how you've got different layers of it. You've got the high up rebellion, you've got the underground rebellion, so the ones that people know about and everyone kind of looks to, and then the people who are going kind of under the radar and trying to make the little changes and the little differences here and there to make a difference to the big overall picture. I love the way that they all came together. You've got, again, a very strong found family aspect in here, and there are some real surprises as well as you move through this series. Some of the betrayals that you get in here were absolutely phenomenal in the way that they were handled and the way that they impacted the overall story, and of course for that, my enjoyment of it. There are some great magical aspects in here, but the magic is not the strongest point for me. I like how you've got characters who can literally do anything. They are basically superheroes. They can turn the tide of a war, and yet they're not the most important aspect. The most important is the individual people, the regular people on the ground just fighting to survive. They're the ones that can turn the tide. They're the ones that make the difference, and they definitely make the difference in terms of the storytelling. So The Last War by Mike Shackle finds itself in 6th place on my list. We then move into another relatively recent entry. This one in number 5 is Greatcoats by Sebastien de Castell. And this one is one of the real fantastic series for me. If you're looking at bromance, if you're looking at camaraderie and the way that characters interact, if that really makes a book for you, this is a fantastic series for you to check out. Often, especially in a fantasy, when you're talking bromance, you've got two main characters, your Frodo and your Sam, your Locke and your Jean. But in here you've got 3 main characters, and I love the extra dimension that gives for the interactions. The characters definitely are the main part of this. The magic is really light, there's very little of it in here overall, but I don't mind that at all because you don't always need that. It does make it kind of a low fantasy setting, and we see a fair amount of the world, but it doesn't seem quite as developed, it doesn't seem quite as unique as many other series, but you don't need that because this is all about the characters. One of the things that really makes it about the characters is that it's told in the first person, so you really get into the head of this main character, Thelkio, as he tells the story. The best thing about this, though, for me, is that you really get to know those other characters as well, and that can be really difficult in a first-person story. So I love this one overall. It's got some of the best moments I've read in fantasy, some real emotional moments, both high and low, and I really love the power of speech that comes across so well in this series as well. There are literal speeches that are delivered that are just absolutely phenomenal for the way that they are handled, the way that they really tug on the heartstrings of the reader and obviously of the characters that they are trying to have an effect on anyway. So overall, The Greatcoats is a great series. It's number 5 in my list, an absolute recommendation. In at 4, and if we're talking about bromances, my absolute favourite of them, just beating Thelkio Kest and Brasti of The Greatcoats, it's Royce and Hadrian of Rhaenyra Revelations. This is a series that is broken up into 6 books, but mostly seen as a trilogy in the bind-up duologies like I've got here. So it does make for some really hefty books if you're looking at them as the 3. But I absolutely love not only the character interactions that you get here, but the stories that are told, the adventures that our characters go on. There are so many revelations that you get as you work your way through this series, things that I really did not, in not quite a million years, but things I really did not see coming. They are worked so well into the storytelling here, and I love that the author is able to do that. It is, as I say, one of the best romances in fantasy, and the interactions that the characters do have, not just Royce and Hadrian, but those around them as well, are pretty much second to none. I just really love how natural it all is and how it works on the page. But as I say, the storyline itself over the course of the series is great. It starts out as just a series of individual adventures pretty much, but you can see as the series goes on how well they are integrating and how different elements from one story start to appear in other stories as well. I love the way it's all weaved together. It makes a fantastic series overall, and Rhaenyra Revelations then is number 4 on my all-time favourites list. So moving into the top 3, and we've got a new entry, the highest new entry on this list. It's The God King Chronicles by Mike Brooks. I absolutely loved this series, as you can tell, because I've put it at number 3 on my all-time favourites list. It does definitely have the bit of recency bias, I guess, because I have read it recently. It's very difficult to compare a series that you've recently read and enjoyed against a series that you've read a number of years ago and really enjoyed, and comparing one against the other was one of the real struggles I had putting together this updated list. But this series just really worked for me. I loved the kind of different take that you've got on dragons. They don't play a big part in the series, but I love that you've got essentially dragons as tanks. They are battle dragons, they're not flyers. I don't think there are any winged dragons actually discussed in here, but you do have small dragons and you do have big dragons, and I love the way that they are all, I guess, utilised in this world and become part of the storytelling. It's the characters again though that make this series. I just love the kind of clash of cultures that you get, especially in this first book, The Black Coast, and how that affects a world and how that affects the individual people. I loved reading about how different people reacted to this clash of cultures and how it influenced their stories and how it really properly changed their outlook on life and also literally their world in many different ways. I think the way it was handled, the way that you've got these two very different cultures trying to integrate, trying to become as one, I just think that was so fascinating. It was really well handled, and I loved how it all turned out. Again, there were some real highs and lows of emotion in this series, all in a good way, because the writing was just absolutely fantastic. The way it was delivered, the way that it was all interwoven, just really worked very well for me. I love this series. I'm going to be very interested to see how it stacks up in a couple of years when I've got a bit more distance between myself and the time that I read them. But for now, this one is at number 3 in my list. So straight into number 2 on my list, and it's another big series, a 10-book beast. This one is The Shadows of the Apt by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Adrian is probably, I would say, my favourite author because he is just so versatile. His imagination is incredible, and you can absolutely see that within the 10 books of this series. You can read them as arcs. It's not a 10-book series where you have to read them all back to back to know what's going on or to get the best experience. Obviously, I'll recommend that because I loved all of the books, but you can read them as an arc of 4 and then 3 and then 3 as you get throughout the 10. But I love how they all come together and how the overall story works. This one is a bit unusual for me because it does deal with the industrial kind of revolution, but I like how that's integrated into the story and how you can really see the impact on the world that it has, and the way that especially it does affect war, because a lot of inventions do come about because of war, and that is definitely shown in here, as we've got this invading army and you've got essentially a nation of artificers trying to come up with new and inventive ways to repel them. Overall, the characters in here were very interesting. I liked them as what you might call typical characters, but also they are very different because these characters are all insect kingdom. They all have different abilities tied to their totem insect, where some can fly, some can sting, and so forth. It just makes for such a different world. It's so imaginative. I absolutely loved my time with The Shadows of the Apt, and I'm loving that it's getting a bit more attention in recent years as well, as Adrian Tchaikovsky continues his all-out assault on fantasy and sci-fi. So another combined entry then at number 1, my absolute top fantasy series of all time. It's The Banished Lands by John Gwynne, made up of The Faithful and the Fallen, the 4 books in that series, and then the follow-up series, the trilogy that is, of Blood and Bone. I just love pretty much everything about this series. The characters, the story, the world building, it all just really worked very well for me. I love that you've got probably one of my favourite settings in fantasy here. It's kind of a Celtic inspired world, and it's just really explored, really developed, really handled very well. Again, this is one that is maybe a little bit light on the magic, but it definitely has the fingers of magic working its way throughout the story, but it's about so much more than that. I love the giants that you've got in here. They're a really interesting element to the story. You've got a proper good versus evil, with essentially angels and demons making up a big part of this, and you've got the chosen one as well, or in fact maybe you've got 2 of those. But if you've got 2 people who are both supposed to be the chosen one, how do you know which one is the actual chosen one? And if one is chosen, what does that make the other? I think that's handled really well, the way that even the reader doesn't necessarily know which side our characters are on as the story progresses. There are parts where you might second guess yourself and think that maybe everything is just turned on its head in here. Some of the elements definitely will be, some of them maybe won't be. Overall, I think the writing in here was absolutely fantastic. The battles were phenomenal. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that as far as battle scenes and animal companions go, John Gwynne is pretty much the best in the business these days at both of those. And overall, it just made for an absolutely fantastic series that still has the top spot as my all-time favourite fantasy series. So there we go, that's my top 10, my all-time favourite fantasy series. Are there any surprises in here? Are you shocked at the new entries and where they appeared in this list? Let me know down below what your favourites are as well. That's everything I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one sometime soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.